computer. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tina Panic from the Avon Library. I'm here with Jen Bennett from the Avon Senior Center and Terry Wilson from the Avon Historical Society. And we're here for the final webinar in our 2022 series. We'll be in webinar mode today, so your video and audio will automatically be turned off. We are recording it and we will share the link with you after. Make sure you can see and hear from the device that you're logging in on. Use the chat box or the Q&A for questions. You can ask the questions at any time. We will get to all of them at the end, or as many as we can. And Jen, would you like to say something from the Senior Center and then toss it to Terry?
Yes, please. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is Jennifer from Avon Senior Center, and we're really excited to continue with our series. And I can't believe we're going to have another exciting night tonight. And the Senior Center wants to thank the Avon Public Library, Tina, and the Historical Society, Terry. And we are loving this series and we look forward to more. So Terry, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th event this year, which is very aptly coincides with Connecticut's Archaeology Month. This is now an annual presentation to update everyone on the tremendous amount of work and breakthroughs of the discovery in 2019 of the Brian D. Jones 12,500-year-old Paleo-Indian site along the Farmington River here in Avon, Connecticut. It is the oldest human occupation site in southern New England, and tonight we have two of the archaeologists who were on site in 2019 and have been working with the artifacts ever since. This series is funded by a grant from the Lower Farmington River and Salmon Brook Wild and Scenic Committee, which receives its funding from the National Park Service. We thank them for their support, and we are applying again for another grant with them for the 2023 series, which was highlighted on the welcome slides. As we have done for the past 2 years, we will have 5 webinars in 2023 on the same March, April, May, September, and October schedule. We hope to have a few special events in between, such as a book talk this coming December with Dr. Ken Feder, whose new book on Native American archaeology in national parks will be coming out at that time. Ken was a presenter for us in the 2021 Unearthing History series, which you can view, as you can all of them, on the Avon Library's YouTube channel. And we're planning to have another artifact identification day in the summer of 2023 at the Avon Senior Center. Before I introduce our speakers, I wish to thank my partners, Tina Panic and Jen Bennett, who have been working with me on this webinar series for the past 2 years and will continue for the foreseeable future. And I wish to thank the town of Avon, which continues to encourage our educational activities in not only recent local history, but also the prehistory of the ancient world that is unfolding here in Avon. We have much more to come in the years ahead, so stay tuned. I'm happy to introduce to you our presenters tonight. If you've been with us over the past several years, you will recognize our first presenter, Dr. David Leslie, who is now Director of Archaeological Research at Heritage Consultants in Berlin, Connecticut, and current President of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. He has a PhD in anthropology from UConn with special interest in the Pleistocene and Holocene adaptations through stone technology, remote sensing applications to archaeological sites, and stable isotope ecology. David was part of the team during the discovery in 2019 with then state archaeologist Brian Jones. Joining him tonight is Dr. Eric Heffter, project archaeologist with Archaeological and Historical Services in Storrs, Connecticut, which has the artifacts under analysis. His PhD in anthropology is from the University of Arizona, where his dissertation was on stone tools to gain a better understanding of human population movements during the early Upper Paleolithic period. He tells me that he's the stone tool man who makes reproductions of paleo tools as it was done over 12,000 years ago. We're happy to have both of them with us for this annual update on the analysis of the site here in Avon. So now, David and Eric, take it away.
Unmute myself. Okay, thanks, Terry. And it sounds like you guys have a great slate of talks scheduled for next year. I think that getting Ken Feder to talk about his new book will also be great. So I'd really like to tune in for that one as well. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I'm going to minimize that window. So as Terry said, I'll be talking first. I'll be providing a little bit of an introduction to the site for those of you who haven't been with us over the last couple of years, or for those of you who have been with us, just a brief recap of sort of what we've talked about so far, some of the things that we know, about the site over the last couple of years of analyses. And then Dr. Heffter will take over and talk about some of the new analyses that AHS has been doing over the past year. So again, this is a talk about the Brian D. Jones Paleo-Indian site. This site was discovered in Avon, Connecticut on the west bank of the Farmington River, here at the Old Farms Road site where the current bridge is. So the bridge, I'm sure many of you have seen it over the last year and a half or so since it was built. The bridge pylons are here now. This is the old bridge here, and you can see the old road alignment on this USGS topographic map. The site is named for the late state archaeologist, Dr. Brian Jones, in recognition of not only his contributions to Paleo-Indian studies in Connecticut and New England in general, but also to the role that he had in the 2012, 2014 in predicting that an ancient site might be here. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But this is something that the state agreed to name the site after Dr. Jones based on his many contributions to this field, but also to this site. So a little bit about the project background. Here we can see these are project plans to show what the area looked like before the bridge was built. There were previous excavations that have been done in the 80s and 90s here where these red outlines are. That's part of the bridge site excavated in 81 and 96 by Ken Fader, who will be talking in a month about his new book, and also Fred Warner in 96. The bridge site is a middle woodland site that was discovered at the ground surface and about 2 to 3 feet below the ground here, right next to the banks of the Farmington River. Can you guys see my mouse as I move it? Yes?
Yes, yep,
Okay,
I see. Yep.
Yeah, it's good to have a laser pointer or something like that as you talk. So these are the extent of where we excavated here, this green boundary, and this is a drone image taken by the contractor Rotha Construction as they were building the bridge. The site itself, as Terry mentioned, was discovered in January of 2019, which, as you might imagine, is sort of the least opportune time to discover an archaeological site in Connecticut. But we were able to deal with that in a number of ways that you'll see pictures of in a little bit. The deposits were found some 1.5 meters or 5 feet below the ground surface. Here you can see where the site is being, the soil is being removed. So what we did was, based on excavations that occurred in 2012, Dr. Jones predicted that while nothing was really found in the first round of excavations, what was found were deep soils. And those soils did not have the classic glacial signature to indicate that they were deposited by the glacier before people were here. And so he suggested, and the state agreed, that before the bridge could be built, we needed to have some deeper investigations. That's where AHS comes in 2019, where we were stationed with a large machine that removed soils in 1 foot increments as we inspected those soils. And once we got down to 4.5 to 5 feet, we started excavating and found the Paleo-Indian site. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. But this is, of course, work that was done in compliance with federal and state regulations here in Connecticut, in partnership with the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the town of Avon. So all of this work has been funded by the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the federal government. And without their funding for this work, none of this would have happened. We've previously presented these results in 2020 and 2021. So I'll be providing this introduction, wrapping up sort of what we've talked about, and then Dr. Heffter will take over after that. So here we see that soil removal that I was talking about. So you can see here where the road is here, an access road. We're down about 5 feet below the modern ground surface. This is where the site was discovered. You can see I'm conducting a ground penetrating radar survey while the rest of the crew are pin flagging out where the shovel test pits are going to be. So we conducted a ground penetrating radar survey of both the surface and then this surface that we stripped or removed the soil off of as well. You can see the results of a portion of that survey here. Although if you'll note, the orientation of these has been flipped. So the river, the Farmington River, is to the right in this top picture, but in the ground penetrating radar image, it's to the left. And what we see here is that there are clear, I mean, it's obvious that there are clear differences in these soil packages when you look at it up here at the top, right? We've got this sort of classic yellow-brown soil here to the left, and then this darker brown silty alluvium soil here to the right. And what we found through the excavations is that this soil to the right is younger. It was deposited in the Holocene. The Holocene refers to the period of time from about 10,000 years ago to the present, when our climate has enjoyed a relative warming period compared to the earlier Pleistocene, that period of time before 10,000 years ago, more commonly referred to as the Ice Age, right? So these brown soils were deposited in the Holocene. These yellow soils were deposited in the Pleistocene when the Paleo-Indian site was occupied. And that's mirrored here below, except for what we see is that here is that Holocene here, where it's sort of not very reflective from the GPR, versus that those Paleo-Indian layers here, the Pleistocene layers, where it's incredibly reflective. And this is a landform that dives towards the river. This is an ancient river terrace that comes down, and you can imagine the river would have been down here. So we were able to determine relatively quickly that we had a Paleo-Indian site. I'll talk more about the excavations in a minute and how we knew that we had a Paleo-Indian site, but we were able to determine that the landform was something quite special based on the ground penetrating radar and also the soil stripping that we did here. And this is just another way. So if I go back, we're looking here at that river terrace or levee coming down here. And now, sorry, I'm going backwards. Now the river is physically like down here. It's towards the bottom of the screen. That those Pleistocene or Paleo-Indian layers are here in white. Again, they are highly reflective, versus that Holocene alluvium, that silt, which is younger, which is not reflective. So what we're looking at here is the edge of that river terrace that the Paleo-Indians encamped on between 10 and 12,700 years ago here. And another way of visualizing that, so this is in 2 dimensions, looking down at it in a plan view at about 50 centimeters below that stripped surface. So that's all the way down 2 meters below the ground, about 6.5 to 7 feet below the ground. Another way to look at it is here with this topographic reconstruction that I've created, where the river terrace is here, and then this is that relatively flat, nice, well-drained river terrace that the Paleo-Indians camped on. So this is, sort of the ideal place for a campsite. It's near the river where you can enjoy fishing or hunting animals, large animals that require water to drink, and also on a well-drained area. So if it rains like tonight, and the water will be gone by tomorrow, so long as it's not continuing to rain. So a very good location, and we were able to determine that based on the ground penetrating radar and based on the successive excavations. So I'm going to provide a little bit about the geologic history of the Farmington River. For those of you that tuned in last year, we had a great lecture on the geology of the Farmington River Valley. So this is just a brief synopsis of the geologic history and why the site is preserved. As I've mentioned a couple of times, the site is here. It's preserved on that levee of the Farmington River, or the river terrace. It's often thought of in New England that it's relatively uncommon for sites to be preserved adjacent to rivers that are that old, because we often think of rivers as being very unstable areas excuse me, during the Pleistocene. Imagine a lot of glacial outwash. So as the glaciers are receding, they might be farther north in Vermont, New Hampshire, or Canada, but they're during the summer and spring months, they're melting a lot. A lot of that water is coming down through this system, making a very strong, powerful river that can easily erode landforms. And so while it's thought that people, of course, would have camped near rivers, those river encampments are not likely to preserve from this time period. That's what we thought for a long time. However, the Brian Jones site and another site in Connecticut, the Templeton site, are showing that that's pretty different. In fact, there are maybe several areas that we can find where Paleo-Indians did encamp next to rivers, and they are preserved too. You might know that the Farmington River in this area of Avon and Farmington farther south, and then into Simsbury, flows north. That's not a very common way for rivers to move in New England. They generally flow south, and that's because there is a glacial moraine here below or south of the Farmington River. A moraine is a large deposit of glacial material here It's a bunch of rubble that was deposited where a glacier sort of stood still for a while as it was receding and just sort of dumped a bunch of rocks. It makes this large hill here. That means that the river, as it started to drain Glacial Lake Farmington, which would have been within the Farmington River Valley, could not erode this landform. So instead of being able to flow south here and find the Connecticut River somewhere farther south, it's forced to incise itself or cut into these glacial lake sediments and flow north until it can find an area here, a pre-existing notch in the Talcott basalt, this mountain ridge that's here. So this basalt notch is actually quite old. Probably it formed at some point during the Triassic period over 220 or so million years ago. But this notch is found by the river, and then it sort of flows through that, comes down farther south here to the Connecticut River. All of that doesn't sound very important, but it is critically important for why the site is preserved. So the river here is forced to flow north, and then it cuts into this basalt here. Basalt is incredibly difficult for a river to erode. So that acts as what geologists or fluvial geomorphologists refer to as a nick point that controls the upriver incision of the Farmington River, making it harder for the river to incise into other landforms. I'll also talk about another thing that we think is preserving the site in a few minutes, some new up-to-date research that we've done in the last year near the site as well, using ground penetrating radar and some terrestrial soil coring too. So there's this notch here is controlling the upriver, although south, fluvial mechanics of the river, helping to preserve that landform, but there's maybe something else that I'll get to in a minute. So, you know, why do we care so much about that notch? Well, again, this levee, this ridge, you can see it preserved along the Farmington River here, north and south. The river's ability to transport large rocks and thus erode this landform is limited to the river channel, as I was talking about from that nick point. So that doesn't mean that it can't flood here. I think some of you that live in the Farmington River Valley may remember, I think it was last summer, much of this area, much of the old Farms Park was underwater. I think I saw people kayaking over the lacrosse fields one day when I drove by. So certainly this area floods, but it doesn't flood with the river channel, and it doesn't deposit lots and lots of dense rocks that can be destructive to archaeological deposits. Instead, what happens is very fine-grained sediments are deposited over this landform and built this elevated terrace over time. Something that we refer to as a lake effect, or a drape of very fine-grained sediments in a very low energy environment. It's perfect for preserving archaeological sites. Again, it's not that people spending time next to rivers and depositing their artifacts is rare. It's incredibly common. All archaeologists know that the best place to find archaeological sites is next to rivers. What's rare is to find sites of this antiquity preserved next to a river. This can happen, this flooding can happen through spring melt flooding, ice rocks or dams that might form farther downstream, or large storm events like the one that happened last summer, where much of this area was covered in water. To test this, while we were doing the excavations, Archaeological and Historical Services partnered with the University of Connecticut's geomorphologist, Will Ouimet, who I believe will be giving a talk next year for this series, to collect a series of sediment cores that, again, I think some of you have seen before, but I'm just giving a reminder of what we've learned so far. So this is a cross-sectional diagram of the Farmington River. So imagine that we've cut where the site is in half, and we're looking at it in 3 dimensions here, but that cross-section of it with a GPR profile above it here that's also a cross-section of the site. Here is the site itself, the Brian D. Jones site here. You can see that classic river terrace diving down here to the right. These are the sediment cores that we collected in 2019 when we did the excavations, and I'll show you some additional soil cores and GPR work that we've done in just a minute too over the last year. So as we get closer to the river, we have those Holocene sediments here. These are reworked Pleistocene deposits closer to the river, while they were probably deposited more recently, what they are is areas from upriver that have been eroded out and then deposited more recently. And you can see those here. We have the Holocene silty alluvium here that I showed you in that plan view of the ground penetrating radar survey, and you can see where that is here as well. So if I go back, sorry, you can see it in the GPR profile here. And the next one you can see here above the site. We then get into the site proper here with those yellow-brown deposits. These are the Pleistocene or Paleo-Indian deposits here. We gave these soils names as well when we excavated them. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. That it doesn't matter much the names that we gave them. They're just the ways that archaeologists make sense of the soils as we excavate them, so we can keep track of the context of the artifacts that come out of the deposits that we excavate. Deep beneath the site, we have these rockier deposits. So if you've noticed, almost all of these, if I go backwards and then go forwards, they're all very fine-grained sediments that I was talking about with that lake effect drape. Not so here in the deeper parts, we start to have gravels. And in fact, we bent this core tube where we met refusal as we were coring it, suggesting that there were even larger gravel or even boulder deposits here. This is probably the base of the river at about 16,000 years ago, where it was a braided channel, a very unstable river before this levee started to be built once that nick point was established. And then as we move behind the site, we have a developing wetland here, this very rich organic deposits that may have, we think, been around when the Paleo-Indian site was occupied, although some recent sediment core dating suggests this portion of the wetland might be younger, but we know, based on some of the stuff that I think Dr. Heffter is going to talk about, that we have wetland plants that are preserved at the site. So we know that there is a wetland nearby. Probably it's just a deeper part of the wetland that we weren't able to core. So about that recent work that we've been doing at the site, some more recent geophysical work. So here to the left, we see a LiDAR image, a bare earth hillshade of the area, and a number of ground penetrating radar transects that we collected perpendicular to that landform I was discussing, as well as some additional soil cores, and then the boundary of the known site prior to this study. This is part of a potential state register nomination for the site that AHS has been involved in with the town and the Avon Historical Society, making sure that the site is protected and preserved, but also given the recognition that it deserves within our state history. To establish a nomination of a site, you have to establish what the boundaries of the site physically are. So the compliance work that AHS did in 2019 was restricted, as it should have been, to the impacts by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. We did not go outside of those areas because we wanted to preserve the site for future generations. And so this is a very minimally invasive way to determine what the boundaries of the site may be to ensure protection of that site. And ground penetrating radar is a completely non-invasive way to establish this. What we found is that what maybe should have been expected, that the landform, that levee, we can see it in many areas to the north and the south too. And so here, this is as far south as we can see it. It's not as dramatic, but it is still there in this ground penetrating radar profile as it comes down here. And then as you go farther north, here it is again. These are Holocene sediments above it, all about at that same depth, about 1.5 to 2 meters. As we go farther north, here's that same sediment as it starts to dive down. And then here, this was the farthest north that we were able to establish where that landform was. And as I mentioned, we did additional soil core and vibrocoring throughout the areas as well. We found very similar sediments in each of these GPR profiles. And we also potentially discovered a archaeological feature that was charcoal rich within the Pleistocene sediments in one of the soil cores as well. And that's really exciting for us archaeologists because it gives us something that we can radiocarbon date, something that we've been able to do very well at this site that I'll talk about in just a minute. But I think what was even more interesting from an archaeological perspective, so establishing the boundaries was very important, but also understanding site preservation is more important because it will help us predict where this site, where other sites like this may be throughout Connecticut and New England. And so here, we're going to take a look at the Thompson Brook as it empties into the Farmington River here.